In 1977, a man hiding deep in the jungle made the United States government an offer that should have been impossible: pay him $100 million or he would poison America. Not a nation, not an army. One man. His name was Khun Sa, and unlike every threat Washington had ever faced before, this one did not come with missiles, troops, or flags. It came with heroin. At his peak, nearly 40% of the heroin on American streets flowed from laboratories he controlled. 1 out of every 4 heroin overdoses in the United States could be traced back to his supply. Emergency rooms from New York to Los Angeles were already overflowing. Doctors were already overwhelmed. Families were already burying their dead. And this man was calmly informing the US government that things could get much worse very quickly. This was not a bluff, and it was not rhetoric. It was a leverage calculation. Khun Sa was not threatening America with destruction. He was offering it a choice. The shocking part was not that a drug lord was powerful. The shocking part was that he was right. He controlled the largest heroin supply on Earth, and he understood something governments hate to admit. Borders mean nothing to addiction, and power does not always come from law, legitimacy, or force. Sometimes it comes from supply chains. Sometimes it comes from patience. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where a system is weakest and applying pressure there without mercy. What makes this story truly disturbing, however, is not how Khun Sa rose or how many people died because of him. It is the uncomfortable fact that he did not emerge by accident. The skills that made him untouchable were learned. The networks that protected him were built during the Cold War. The chaos he exploited was created by global strategy, not jungle madness. This is not the story of a criminal who beat the system. It is the story of a system that quietly manufactured a criminal powerful enough to hold a superpower hostage and then watched as he walked away untouched. The question is not how Khun Sa became so dangerous. The question is, how many decisions made far from the jungle made him inevitable? The Golden Triangle was not born criminal. It was abandoned. After 1949, when China's civil war ended and Cold War lines hardened, this remote stretch of jungle where Burma, Laos, and Thailand collided became something far more dangerous than lawless territory. It became a strategic blind spot. Power vacuums do not stay empty. They attract men willing to fill them. Intelligence agencies saw the region not as a society, but as a chessboard. Proxy forces were armed, trained, and financed to fight ideological wars that could not be fought openly. Weapons moved faster than laws. Training arrived without oversight. Responsibility stopped at the edge of the map. In that environment, violence was normalized, logistics were professionalized, and survival depended on learning faster than everyone else. A young observer watched closely. He learned how armies move, how loyalty is purchased, how fear is managed, and most importantly, how power flows when no one is truly in charge. This chapter is not about destiny or genius. It is about incentives. When force is outsourced, competence spreads without accountability. When order is suspended in the name of strategy, predators thrive. The jungle did not corrupt him. It educated him. Every rifle lesson, every ambush drill, every payment delivered under the table reinforced a single truth system's reward: those who understand them, not those who obey them. By the time governments realized what had been growing in their blind spot, it was no longer a man they were dealing with, but a method, one designed to survive pressure, absorb chaos, and turn disorder into opportunity. The monster was not born screaming into the jungle. It was assembled quietly, piece by piece, by a world that believed short-term advantage was worth any long-term cost. What separated Khun Sa from every other armed trafficker in the Golden Triangle was not brutality, courage, or ambition. It was how he thought. While others fought over territory and extorted whatever they could reach, he studied movement, how goods flowed, how money changed hands, how protection was bought, and where authority quietly disappeared. He did not see opium as a crop to be stolen or taxed. He saw it as the first link in a chain that stretched all the way to American cities, and he understood that whoever controlled the entire chain controlled the outcome. Farmers, refiners, smugglers, brokers, most criminals treated them as separate problems. He treated them as components of a single system that could be integrated, optimized, and defended. This was not instinct. It was analysis. Step by step, he eliminated middlemen, absorbed risk, and replaced chaos with structure. When the Burmese military offered him immunity in exchange for fighting communist insurgents, he recognized the moment for what it was: legitimacy without scrutiny. Official protection meant scalability. It meant time. It meant the freedom to think long-term in a world addicted to short-term survival. His organization began to resemble a corporation more than a gang: clear roles, disciplined enforcement, predictable routes, and redundancy built into every operation. Violence became a tool, not a reflex. Corruption became a cost of doing business. By the time authorities noticed his expansion, they misunderstood what they were facing. They looked for a kingpin to arrest, not a system to dismantle. That mistake would prove fatal, because systems do not collapse when one man falls. They adapt, reroute, and grow stronger under pressure. And quietly, almost invisibly, a jungle operation was becoming something far more dangerous, a self-sustaining machine designed to outlast governments themselves. In the spring of 1967, the machine he had built made its first fatal mistake. It became visible. A massive caravan moved through the mountains, hundreds of armed men, a line of pack animals stretching nearly half a mile, carrying tens of thousands of pounds of raw opium worth fortunes far beyond the jungle. This was not a smuggling run. It was a declaration. Khun Sa was pushing directly into territory controlled by the same forces that had once trained him, daring them to accept a new reality or be crushed by it. For days, the convoy crept forward, scouts scanning tree lines, guards gripping weapons slick with sweat. Then the jungle detonated. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions at once. Former allies attacked with fury, rival armies smelled opportunity, and state forces joined the chaos, each believing the prize justified the blood. When aircraft arrived overhead, the gamble collapsed into catastrophe. Bombs tore open the forest floor. Animals screamed. Men fell where they stood. Opium burned into the soil like a curse. By nightfall, the illusion of invincibility was gone. The shipment was destroyed or seized, his fighters scattered or dead, and the reputation that had protected him shattered in a single afternoon. He escaped with his life, but nothing else. Enemies celebrated, governments recalculated, and whispers spread that the jungle prince had finally overreached. It looked like the end of a criminal career. In reality, it was the end of something more dangerous: arrogance. What emerged from the smoke was not a defeated warlord, but a survivor who had learned the most valuable lesson of power: that brute force attracts annihilation. And survival belongs to those who adapt before the world finishes aiming. When the handcuffs closed in 1969, most observers believed the story was over. Arrested at an airport, charged with treason, and thrown into a Mandalay prison cell, Khun Sa appeared finished, another jungle warlord neutralized by the state. Concrete walls replaced mountain passes. Silence replaced gunfire. For many men, 5 years of confinement would have meant decay. For him, it meant recalibration. Prison stripped away movement, but left something far more dangerous intact: time to think. He read obsessively, returning again and again to military philosophy, especially the art of war. Slowly, instinct gave way to doctrine. Emotion was identified as a liability. Loyalty became conditional. Every relationship was reduced to leverage, every alliance a temporary transaction. By the time he finished refining this worldview, he no longer saw himself as a fighter struggling against fate, but as a strategist navigating incentives. Outside the prison walls, his followers absorbed the same lesson. In 1973, they executed a move so audacious it exposed the weakness of the state itself: the kidnapping of 2 Soviet doctors. No money was demanded, only his release. The Burmese government faced an impossible calculation: international humiliation or Cold War escalation. In 1974, the prison gates opened. He walked out thinner, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. The man who entered confinement had relied on force and fear. The one who emerged understood something far more powerful. Governments bend under pressure when the cost of standing firm becomes unbearable. Prison did not end his ambition. It purified it. And the world was about to meet a version of him designed not to fight the system, but to outthink it. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, what Khun Sa unleashed was no longer a criminal enterprise. It was an industrial process. He rebuilt his power deeper inside the mountains beyond the reach of governments that preferred distance to confrontation, and transformed heroin production from scattered jungle kitchens into factory-scale manufacturing. Chemists worked around the clock. Laboratories refined opium into nearly 90% pure heroin, a concentration so lethal it rewrote the economics of addiction. Where street heroin in American cities had once been diluted to survive the journey, this product arrived potent, consistent, and cheap. Supply exploded, prices dropped, bodies followed. Thousands of pounds moved along routes protected by bribery, intimidation, and silence, crossing borders that existed only on maps. In the United States, the impact was devastating and invisible at the same time. Overdose deaths climbed, emergency rooms filled. Entire neighborhoods hollowed out under the weight of addiction. There was no single explosion, no headline-grabbing attack, just a steady accumulation of funerals. Law enforcement agencies called it an industrial revolution of death, and the phrase was not exaggeration. Production scaled faster than prevention, distribution adapted faster than policing, and demand ensured that every seizure was quickly replaced. From his jungle stronghold, Khun Sa understood the asymmetry perfectly. He did not need to defeat America. He only needed to outproduce its capacity to respond. Each new shipment was not just merchandise. It was pressure applied across thousands of miles, testing the limits of institutions designed to react rather than anticipate. By the time Washington grasped the true scale of what was happening, the damage was already embedded in the system. Addiction had become the delivery mechanism, and heroin had become a weapon that did not announce itself until it was too late. By the early 1990s, the walls were closing in, but not in the way anyone expected. Khun Sa was not losing because he had been cornered in a firefight or outgunned by a superior force. He was losing because the environment that had protected him for decades was changing. New enemies emerged who could not be bribed or intimidated. Rival militias advanced with the quiet persistence of people who planned to stay. International pressure finally forced neighboring governments to seal borders that had once functioned as open arteries. At the same time, global law enforcement dismantled his distribution network piece by piece, brokers arrested, accounts, frozen routes exposed. For the first time in his career, pressure arrived from every direction at once. The system that had once absorbed chaos now began to fracture. Health problems mounted, allies defected. The revolutionary image cracked under the weight of its own contradictions. Intelligence analysts predicted a final siege, a violent ending that fit the mythology of drug empires, a last stand burning compounds, bodies in the jungle. But that ending never came. Instead, he made his most calculated move yet. In 1996, without warning or spectacle, Khun Sa surrendered not to foreign agents or rival forces, but to the Burmese government itself. There was no battle, no bloodshed, no victory for justice. Just paperwork, handshakes, and a deal negotiated behind closed doors. He disbanded his army, promised to exit the drug trade, and in return, secured what he valued most: protection from extradition. The collapse of his empire did not arrive with gunfire. It arrived with silence, revealing a truth far more unsettling than violence: that power, when exercised patiently, can choose how it ends. When Khun Sa died quietly in 2007, there were no sirens, no headlines announcing justice, served no sense of closure. He passed away in comfort, surrounded by family, his fortune intact, never having spent a single day inside an American prison. To many observers, that ending felt like a failure of history itself. But the true legacy of his life is not measured by how it ended, it is measured by what endured. The heroin routes he pioneered did not disappear, they evolved. The model he perfected did not collapse, it migrated. Criminal networks around the world studied his rise and absorbed its lessons. Control systems, not territory. Cultivate political ambiguity. Always keep one jurisdiction where your enemies cannot follow. His greatest achievement was not evading capture, it was proving that power does not require legitimacy, only leverage. For the communities he claimed to protect, the schools and roads eventually faded, but the damage of addiction spread far beyond the jungle, embedding itself into cities, families, and generations that never knew his name. For governments, his story exposed an uncomfortable truth. Strategies built on short-term advantage often produce long-term consequences that cannot be undone. He was not an anomaly. He was a byproduct. A reminder that when violence is outsourced, accountability dissolves, and oversight is sacrificed for expedience, something fills the gap. And what fills it rarely looks like a villain at first. It looks like order, like efficiency, like stability, until the cost becomes impossible to ignore. His life forces a final, unsettling question on anyone willing to confront it honestly. If one man could exploit the fractures of global power so completely, how many similar systems are operating right now, quietly, patiently waiting for history to notice them only after it is too late? This story isn't just about one man in a jungle. It's about what happens when power operates without accountability, when short-term strategy ignores long-term cost, and when systems reward efficiency over humanity. Khun Sa didn't defeat governments with force, he exploited their blind spots. The warning is clear. If we don't examine how our policies, markets, and incentives create these outcomes, history will repeat itself in new forms. If this story made you think, hit like. If you believe others should hear this warning, share it. And if you want more deep investigations like this, subscribe, because the next story is already unfolding.